So I don't like Dark Souls 3 as much as I like Dark Souls 2. And what I want to do in this video is explain why using what I think is the most pertinent and, I don't know, the level that expresses that in the most obvious way and as well as in the most abundant of ways, right? And before I do anything else, I just want to be very, very clear that I'm not saying that Dark Souls 3 is worse somehow than Dark Souls 2. I'm not saying that Dark Souls 3 is like a bad game in any way. I'm not saying that any of the things that I point out in this video are bad. I'm just saying that I don't like them and I prefer a lot of the ways they did things in Dark Souls 2. And that doesn't mean I think all of Dark Souls 2 is good either or whatever, right? I just want to be very, very clear that I'm not attacking this game. I'm just going through this as a critique, I suppose. And I chose a night class because, I don't know, I feel like it's the most simple and like vanilla experience you can get. I know I didn't exactly do that in Dark Souls 2 because I used the rapier, but the rapier is also very, very Dark Souls 2, right? I don't play through these games slowly very often. Most of the time I play through these games, I'm running past everything. But my opinion in this way mostly comes from playing through the game slowly in my first playthrough. Also, my starting gift was Black Fire Bombs, specifically for the 2 plus of men here. Because goddamn, these things are terrible. Like the one thing that I will not say is somehow not objectively bad in this game is a plus of man. If you like fighting them, that's fine, but I hate everything about them. They're so unfun to me. That's like the one thing that I'm okay with you thinking that I think is actually bad. That's just a preference thing. Anyway, so I was honestly expecting the guy down here to come up and attack me, because sometimes he does, because he'll be at the right point to do that in his walk cycle. This guy wielding an axe here will attack you while you're dealing with the halberd guy and the 2 dogs. But starting off strong with 2 dogs, you know. Luckily, they were in a part of their walk cycle where they didn't attack me at the same time. I was able to kite them without using any consumables or whatever. And while it is always possible to kite them, it can consist of a lot of waiting, and I don't think the game expects you to do that. I think the game does expect you to go in and attack them both at the same time, just because that's a lot of what Dark Souls 3's level design facilitates generally. Oh, damn. I didn't kill it fast enough. Though, I guess that's probably a better thing. Why did I get Estus? Why does Dark Souls 3 sometimes just give you Estus? Anyway, if you don't kill that guy quick enough, which most people probably won't in their first playthrough, it will aggro a couple enemies, namely this guy and the guy down there, and then you're expected to deal with multiple enemies at the same time, likely one coming from behind you, right? Which is kind of the opposite of what Dark Souls 2 did, where if you played optimally, not necessarily optimally, but if you played in the way that the game expected you to, while you might have to deal with multiple enemies at the same time, they're not going to be attacking you from multiple directions, right? So there is crowd control in Dark Souls 2, but it's not the kind of crowd control where you're expected to be surrounded, which is a lot of what Dark Souls 3 does. I was not expecting that range to be so long. I guess that's on me for underestimating the reach of a spear. And I'm going to go this way instead of up past the Drake for now. Whoa. See, like even this, you're not going to find a group of 4 enemies walking down 5 enemies with an archer walking down a level like this in Dark Souls 2, right? Because that's not what Dark Souls 2 is built around. That's not what the combat expects of you in Dark Souls 2. And again, I'm not saying that this is somehow worse. I'm not saying that, like, being expected to deal with multiple enemies in a scenario like this is somehow less fun or whatever. I'm saying that I don't prefer it. I'm not going to hamper on about not saying that Dark Souls 3 is bad anymore. I just want to be very, very clear about that, because I know a lot of people will definitely misinterpret what I'm saying. Jozo's not kind of... I guess I probably shouldn't be trying to like predict where enemies are either. Though, with Dark Souls 3, if you don't want to get ambushed, you kind of have to. Like, knowing that those 2 guys will attack me, right, is kind of just a trial and error kind of thing. also really don't like the Slothic Knight. He feels way too strong for this early in the game. Though, especially in a scenario where he's not entirely optional like the Black Knights in Dark Souls 1, right? I guess he doesn't do that much damage. I don't know why I thought he was that strong. Because he doesn't have much more health than the Great Axe and Halberd guy from earlier either. I guess I should probably talk about the Drake, so I'm going to go back and do that because the Drake is a really good example of like something I don't like about Dark Souls 3. And I know Dark Souls 1 did something similar with the Drake, but I don't think... No, it attacks you as soon as you get on the bridge, huh? Like, if you don't just sprint, you'll be hit by the fire. And while the fire probably won't immediately one-shot you, you'll still constantly be taking damage while the fire is on the ground. And that just doesn't feel good. I don't know. I don't know if that's just me, but I really don't like, first of all, that the fire lasts so long, but also that it's not just a you took damage and that's it thing like Dark Souls 1. Yeah, I don't know. It's less annoying in Dark Souls 1, I think, is my thing. Though I guess if you're, you know, low on health from the Taurus Demon, it can be definitely annoying to immediately die there. So I'm not going to say that Dark Souls 1 did it better or whatever. Also that the Drake stays there and you can't get rid of it easily. You can't prevent the Drake from spawning if you go a different direction. There are items where the Drake is that you can't get. Like in Dark Souls 1, you can get the Drake to come down to you, run past it, and grab the enemy, or rather grab the items without threat of being immediately obliterated no matter what you do, right? So there are ways to deal with the Drake that aren't just sitting there and shooting it with a bow forever or just taking the damage. And this instance of the Drake in Dark Souls 3 doesn't really have that. And then there's, you know, the Drake in Lothric Castle, where you can get rid of it and you're expected to get rid of it, I believe. I don't know. I think you can get past it without getting rid of it at all, but if you want any of the items there, you do have to kill it, and I think that was a good way to use it. However, I don't think I've ever actually got past that area where you're like running past the gate, or rather the portcullis, where you have to like run past to get to the other side, right, where you can actually take out the Drake. I don't think I've ever got through that without taking damage, and I'm not sure it's possible to. Though that might just be on me. So I'm not going to make any judgment calls about it. And I don't think forced damage is necessarily a bad thing, especially when you're in a scenario like that, right? I do think in a scenario like, I don't know, like against bosses, I really, really do not like Moog, because you will take damage, right? Even if you have the tier, you still take a little bit of damage from it. It's not very much, but you do still take damage. I don't think I've ever actually been... No, I've done Grey Rat's Quest. I don't do this part often. I don't come down here very often. I've done it maybe a couple times. This is a firebomb thrower, right? Yeah. I don't know if these barrels being explosive is obvious, especially since this would probably be our first time ever encountering explosive barrels. But I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that one, to be honest. Also, that enemy, notice how I specifically did not look around the corner. I grabbed the item, then looked. That's just a product of me being used to Dark Souls 3 level design, and I probably shouldn't be doing that. I didn't know the enemy was there, to be clear. I only... Yeah, I don't think I have the key. It doesn't matter. I only did that because that's how Dark Souls 3 treats the level design. There are scenarios in which you will be attacked from behind. And you just kind of have to learn to deal with it. What is this? I actually don't know how to get in there. Anyway, so I've become less cautious about looking around corners in Dark Souls 3 specifically, because the game doesn't really expect you to very much beyond the early hours. And even in the early hours, like, if you're used to not doing it, you can deal with it pretty easily. Like this guy. Like, what? Where did he come from? I genuinely have no idea. But the fact that they drew your attention with the guy coming up the ladder, and then this guy shows up, I don't know. Definitely doesn't feel great. I don't, like, I'm sure it's possible to avoid being attacked from behind there. I don't know how. I'm just gonna chuck a bunch of firebombs. Oh god. I wish you could stun it more often. But, I don't know, like as a pyromancer class, the passive man stops being a threat. but as anything else, it's one of the most, if not the most annoying enemy in the game, in my opinion. And I do not like it, and I don't know how I feel about them being used, especially in the first area when you haven't even come to grips with the combat. Though I don't think Edex Gundyr is a very good first boss. The first phase is really, really good as a first boss, and just as a boss in general. So I think Gundyr is one of my favorite tutorial bosses until phase 2, and that just kind of ruins it and makes it the worst tutorial boss in the series. There are multiple tutorial bosses in Dark Souls 2 that I would actually consider tutorial bosses. Oh, this is a great example of being forced to deal with multiple enemies without being able to see them coming. Like, I'm sure technically you can see that... Is this guy dead? No, he's not. I'm sure technically you can see that they're hanging over the edge, right? If you're really, really observant. But I don't think it's fair to say that you're expected to, especially since you're already dealing with the 2 archers. So that's a scenario in which I would say you are expected to be ambushed there, and there's not really anything you're supposed to do about it. Well, in Dark Souls 2, all of the scenarios in which you are ambushed, you are not expected to be. You're expected to see that you are about to be ambushed and do something about it. I'm not actually sure what causes the guy behind that pot to aggro. Dark Souls 3 backstabbing is also very finicky. I feel like if you see the corpse here, you're probably going to roll through these to see if there's something up about it. And that will aggro that guy, so I do think that's actually a good introduction to enemies hiding behind stuff. What the hell? Okay. Does he only show up when you grab the item? If so, I do like that. However, it would have been nice if the same thing happened to the guys over there. I don't know, like only after you killed the archers to introduce the concept of enemies showing up over railings. Who knows, maybe my opinion of this level will change if I start, or through this video. I just think that this is the worst first level in any of the FromSoft games. Ouch. Stop shield bashing. There we go. I forget how aggressive Dark Souls 3 expects you to be too. Learning the combat with these enemies probably isn't the best, like especially the Pusso Men. But learning the combat with the dogs and the Lothric Knights also doesn't feel great. The normal hollows are fine, I guess. The stronger hollows are also a cool mix-up. And I do like the stronger hollows, how they just kind of are intermixed with the weaker hollows. But the dogs don't feel like a good tutorial enemy, other than like introducing you to the speed of the game. But I think like the thieves do that just fine as well, right? So dogs in a tutorial level, especially in a FromSoft game, doesn't feel great in my opinion. I think Bloodborne is guilty of the same thing. Though, again, not like objective bad or whatever. I just think it would have been better to not have dogs to help you learn the combat. Would have been better to have a slower enemy. Like even the thralls, honestly. I don't know lore-wise if it would make sense for a thrall to be here other than Grey Rat. But I feel like the thralls would have been a much better enemy. Like, have a Zweihander that isn't on fire. The axe thralls actually would probably be better than the Zwei thralls. I remember these enemies being a lot harder to kite, actually. Oh, this one. So, yeah, I guess this area isn't as bad as I remembered. Because I definitely do remember having to deal with multiple enemies here. The guy up there throws fire bombs. Right, that's why it's so annoying. At least that's part of why it's so annoying. I also hate that guy. He's not great to learn the combat with. I did start at the knight, so I do have a 100% shield, but which makes it significantly more bearable. But even with it, I don't know. They just don't feel like good enemies, especially since the game doesn't expect you to be, like, passive with the... Not passive, but doesn't expect you to learn the enemy moveset with the shield like Dark Souls 1 and 2 do. Instead, it expects you to be heavily aggressive, a lot like Bloodborne. But Bloodborne did away with the shields entirely. I do like that Dark Souls 3 has shields because you can use them in an aggressive way, right? You can use them to get up right next to an enemy to attack them. That's what I always use shields for. But they're also useful in scenarios where you don't know the area yet, so it's not possible for you to be aggressive. That's a mean enemy placement. But honestly, I'm okay with that one. Because if you miss that one, it's kind of on you after all the other enemies that are like sitting down like that. These guys also don't look like you should be able to backstab them, but I'm glad you can. Very slow enemy. I never realized how slow these guys are. I don't know. I think I changed my opinion on this specific Winged Knight placement. Though the twin axe ones in the castle are awful and I hate them. I don't know. I don't think this level is as bad. Not bad. Is guilty of all of the things that I remember it being guilty for, or at least it is in to a much lesser degree. I do like this level significantly more than I thought I would going through it like this. Because while I have formed an opinion, it's also tainted by sprinting through the level in a lot of my playthroughs in this game. However, when I think about what I don't like about Dark Souls 3, it's this area right here specifically. Because you're going to come up to this guy and you're going to start attacking him, right? And then 4 other enemies just show up out of nowhere that you couldn't have possibly predicted because the foliage there hides their hands. And again, the game expects you to learn how to deal with ambushes like that. But I don't think those ambushes are fun. I don't think dealing with them is what I like about Dark Souls. Again, I don't think it's bad. It's just not what I prefer. And Dark Souls 3 has a lot of instances where you'll be attacking an enemy and then another enemy will come up behind you. And that's not a bad thing. That is a thing that I do not prefer. Irithyll is probably my least favorite level in the game because of that and how many enemies it just spams you with. So honestly, like Bloodborne, the bonfire, right? The bonfire mob in Central Yharnam. I can't remember what that place is called. The bonfire mob in Central Yharnam is probably one of the worst instances because, first of all, in any of the FromSoft games, I mean, specifically, just because, like, first of all, that's a tutorial area. You're definitely still learning the combat at that point. But also, you know, there are dogs, there are gunners that are faster than archers. So it's harder to learn to deal with the gunners than it is the archers in the Souls games. And there are just, like, so many enemies. It does really good with, like, teaching you to look around corners, Yharnam generally, or Central Yharnam generally, and, like, even around that bonfire mob. And it's very possible to kite a lot of enemies in that mob, but I don't know, throwing so many at you at once, or, like, the group of 4 enemies just before the bonfire mob. That's a different video. I need to play Bloodborne again. And that might be a good excuse to do so. Ouch. Stop it. I think I need to heal. Just in case. Ouch. There we go. I think if you shield break like that, or you guard break like that, you actually get a riposte opportunity. I don't know. I don't like being expected. I don't think you're necessarily expected to deal with both of those Lothric Knights at once. However, you're definitely... The fact that they're so close together, and that's a possibility depending on where they are in their walk cycle if you don't specifically wait to kite them. Like, waiting is boring, and then also dealing with 2 Lothric Knights at the same time sucks, especially this early in the game. So I guess it is kind of just setting up for the rest of the game, where you're constantly being spammed with enemy groups like that. God, especially Lothric Castle. I do not like Lothric Castle. Lothric Castle is one of the worst levels in this game, in my opinion. Though I do think Irithyll is worse. Oh my god, I thought he was dead. There we go. And then the extra one up here. I don't know if it's possible for this guy to aggro on you while you're lower down, but this guy does offer a safer, and in my opinion, easier path to get to the dancer from Vort's arena. You can just run up here and only have to run past 1 Lothric Knight instead of the 2. Though I guess neither are particularly difficult. Will this guy get up? Okay. I wonder what causes that guy to get up. I guess I didn't, or should have checked that. Because depending on why or when he gets up, he could be more or less annoying. I feel like I should play through this entire game slowly like this again and learn the level design better. It's like, I do not when I replay these games, right, I run past everything because I've already dealt with the enemy encounters. And I feel like that's expected of you. And Dark Souls 3 definitely does not feel like it's built around that. Yeah. Again, Dark Souls 3 isn't a bad game. I don't think it's worse than Dark Souls 2 in any way, other than me preferring it less. I do think Dark Souls 1 is the best of the games, and I like what Dark Souls 1 did the most. But I should have upgraded this thing. Ah. Vort, of all the enemies to die to, the first time I die in the video is to Vort. I'm disappointed in myself, but I did only go in with one healing, so, or with one Estus, so I guess that's kind of on me. I think another thing that I really don't like, I pointed it out a couple times, or I didn't necessarily point it out, but I brought it up indirectly a couple times. I do not like the inconsistency of this game. I don't think inconsistency, again, I don't think it's inherently a bad thing, where sometimes you might have to deal with both Lothric Knights at the same time, or sometimes you might have to deal with both dogs in both hollows in that area right next to the start sometimes, right? I don't think that that inconsistency is bad, but for what I like in a Souls game, I do think it diminishes the qualities that I prefer, especially when it comes to like learning and performing an area well. Also, the potential differences in Vort's second phase moveset, where most of the time he charges, but sometimes he just doesn't. Also, I do think that Vort disincentivizes shield use in an interesting way, rather than just constantly shield bashing. Constantly shield bashing is kind of boring. But Vort doing the frost buildup, like, see, he didn't charge again. Usually he charges there, and then does the ice breath thing. Anyway, the frost buildup I think is a really good way to disincentivize shield use. Uh-oh. Also the fact, oh, he's charging now. Never mind. Oh god. Also the fact that I healed immediately after dodging an attack. Okay. The fact that I healed immediately after dodging an attack, and then he followed that up with an attack that hit me while I was still healing, or like when I was just getting out of healing and being able to do something again, that's kind of, I don't like that one. I definitely don't like that. Vort, I don't think is a good tutorial boss at all. I guess Vort isn't really a tutorial boss. I don't think Vort works well as an early boss, though I do think he's a better tutorial boss than EDX. That's not really saying much. I don't like a lot of the early fights at all, though. Crystal Sage, Deacons of the Deep, I don't like either of them. I like the first phase of the Abyss Watchers, but the second phase with all the fire trails making it significantly more difficult to dodge, and also sometimes kind of necessitating spamming dodge rolls kind of teaches the wrong lesson, especially since a lot of people are going to end up fighting the Abyss Watchers before the Deacons or Crystal Sage even. Wolnir isn't great. I really don't like Pontiff. Yorm is probably one of my least favorite gimmick bosses in the series, just because it's boring and the same every time. Though fighting him without the Storm Ruler, while an overly long experience, if it wasn't as long, it wouldn't be that bad. Okay, is he gonna charge me this time? He is. He's not. He is? Okay. He swung his hammer the first time, so that's why I didn't think he was doing it, but evidently. Honestly, me dying has been purely to greed, and I just haven't been paying attention. Because, you know, I've played this game for like 200 something hours. I should be good at Vort by now. See, that was greed. I should not have attacked from neutral like that. And I'm totally willing to accept that I died from greed multiple times. However, I do not think that the death, or that getting hit immediately after dodging and then healing immediately was my fault. Because the other Souls games don't do that at all. I don't think it's a bad thing to have attacks that you can't heal after. Manus has those for sure. And hell, there are a lot of bosses in Dark Souls 1 that don't give you opportunity to heal afterward. And a lot in Dark Souls 2 as well. But because it happened so early in Dark Souls 3, like in Dark Souls 1, you're expected to have learned the combat and to understand when you should be healing and that you should learn the boss before you try to do something like that. In Dark Souls 3, it happens immediately, which is not great, but I don't know. I think I've hampered on enough. I like Dark Souls 3. I think it is a good game. I do not think it is inherently better or worse than Dark Souls 1 or 2, and it is my least favorite of the trilogy. And I would also probably put it below Demon Souls, Bloodborne, and Kiro. I'd probably put Elden Ring lower, just on my personal ranking. But anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I love you all. I especially want to thank White Flame, Harrison Briggs, Haldrebra, The Dire Gay, Funny Guy 619, Falcon, Nikki P. Jones, SD, 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 SSD, SD, XDD, Manarok, V, Emily, and Ryan Rickard for supporting the channel. I don't know how to end this.